buddy fucking colonel to end the whole thing. So this is largely on you. This, if you're watching. You, Matt Cock. But that'll do for now. I'd like to talk about mongrelization a little bit today. I see a lot of interracial couples, in particular in this town, for some reason, although I guess that shouldn't be too shocking considering the demographics. But when I see an interracial couple, I think one of two things, and I don't believe I can't imagine that I'm unique in this. I think one of two things: either the guy couldn't do any better, or the girl's a whore, or has some variety of mental illness or psychological issue. And in particular, what I'm referring to is a white man and a colored girl, or a man of color and a white female. I'll begin with the male side of it and perspective on this, and the Army seemed to, although there are other variations on that, the Army seemed to have a lot of this, and I saw plenty of officers with Asian wives or black wives, and I always thought, this is what you're resigning yourself to. You couldn't do any better than this to provide you with companionship, ultimately. I mean, even mail order, you can get a mail order bride from Russia or the Ukraine. You don't have to resign yourself to some iguana, some lizard. But I just, more than anything, I pity the chap. I had a flatmate here, a suite mate. He must have had, I don't know, I was almost curious enough to ask and inquire as to his motivation. He only hung out with black people. He brought in, there was like 4 of them one day. He, in a trail behind him, I felt like saying, pretty good day at the slave auction, huh? He might as well have been coming from an auction. When they have a long chain behind them, and he had a black girlfriend, and I remember thinking, like, I hope you don't do whatever I guess you have to do to make you happy, but I hope you don't expect me to envy you. You might as well go down to the pet store and buy a puppy and start fucking it. I'm not going to envy you that either. I'm more pity. It's more pity than anything else. But from the female perspective, if it's, and I see a lot more of this, first and foremost, you're not unique. You're not on the cutting edge. There are whores and to me the definition of a whore is the greatest crime man can commit, any individual, is betrayal. And the greatest betrayal, I think I talked about this before, I may have. There's no greater betrayal, though, than blood. So what motivates you? First of all, you're not unique. There are whores in not only every city, not only every town, but every village. Find a little settlement of 500 people. You'll find one deranged female that'll find a black dick and suck it. You're not unique. Maybe 30 years ago, you were shocking. Nobody's raising an eyebrow. You're a degenerate, but you're not chic. Sometimes it's a psychological issue. There was a girl on Howard Stern once I saw who had been raped by 3 white men. So she had the psychological block. Okay, that's a mental issue. That's a psychological dilemma. I was talking with a girl online who said she likes getting the dirty looks. She's like a psychological masochist. I think it's usually some sort of psychological issue. Because what sense does it make? To look at another configuration of this, if I was a black dude, I can't really condemn them because I was talking with this one dude once and he said, well, if you were me, what would you take if you had a choice? I mean, you got a good point. I mean, if a third to a half of all your females are disgustingly obese and have bad skin, yeah, and if these girls are going to be whores, in part, I can't blame you. I mean, you are dating up, but you're still ultimately thinking, there's a couple of issues with it. One, I think I can make the point you're still thinking like a second-class citizen. Well, what is it? It seems the first thing that a black man does when he does become successful, and not just in sports, although that's a big part of it, gets himself a white woman. She could be 400 pounds. She's still white. It's a trophy, and it's like a status symbol. Well, what does that mean? It means your women have no status. Or it means you're still thinking like a second-class citizen. If that's the first thing you do when you make it, moving on up. Moving on up. I had a buddy. I did eat with, I mean, he wasn't a nig. He just happened to be black. Cool fella. I called him Big Cat. He was like Griff to me from Married with Children. And I said, you're a pretty sharp chap. You're going into a good field. You're gonna be successful. You're gonna get yourself a white woman. He's like, no, I'm gonna keep it real and be like Michael Jordan. He's like, well, we'll see. We'll see. I put that challenge to him. A few years later, I ran into him in McDonald's. He had this big, fat, white woman. I said, I told you. Still thinking like a second-class citizen. You'll never be equal in the eyes of Middle America until your aristocracy of your culture, the first thing they do, and it happens, it's not an exception and it's not an anomaly. It happens that frequently. Until you start condemning it en masse, your elite are embarrassing you. I think that's about all I have to say on that. If society still had integrity collectively and principles and values, you wouldn't see this, certainly not nearly as much. But when the collective zeitgeist is, hey, be tolerant, but that's a code. You were talking about codes before. Thug is a code word for nig. Tolerance is a code word too. It's really an attack mechanism of the left. What it means is lower your guard, stop caring, lower your values, lower your principles, and just have a porous defense, as it's called in boxing. Just let anything goes and just watch society disintegrate, which is what we want to have happen. Well, if you're not going to hold anyone to any sort of standard, then yeah, you're going to see the disintegration of the ethnic hegemon. And without an ethnic hegemon, you'll have, well, I'll comment on the issues with diversity later, but there's a lot of bad things that go with it more than good things. It's ultimately a dangerous and destructive thing to not have any hegemon, any sovereign. But I'll comment on that another time. But this is, from any perspective, if you're not going to have any integrity or hold anyone to any sort of accountability, this is on you as a society, and this will perpetuate itself. But that's up to you. I'd just like to wrap up now on my insight and notions on the American whore, and if this really is the greatest crime within the scope of mankind, within betrayal of blood, what is the appropriate punishment for this particular crime? I would vote for crucifixion myself. And why I settle on that is because I draw inspiration from ancient Rome, and the greatest threat in ancient Rome to the state was runaway slaves. not that it's a crime, obviously, to want to escape bondage, but from the state's perspective, when you have a third of your populace as slave, the greatest fear on behalf of a citizen is that your slave would kill you and then run away. And so the state and the populace had to conceive of the most heinous, horrible deterrent to eradicate from a slave's mind even the notion of killing their master and running away, and then actually follow through and say these are examples. So, you know, a horrible crime. Obviously, it would probably violate a particular amendment of the Bill of Rights, but the most heinous crime, I think, warrants the most heinous punishment. But that's the point I wanted to make there. The analogy of the American whores, if I can make this analogy, I compare them to slave owners and those that perpetuated the industry of slavery once upon a time. And I'll explain what I mean. Why we have the race problem we have today is because once upon a time there were these greedy, short-sighted individuals, not a ton of them, but enough of them, landowners, merchants, individuals, to conceive of and then create and then perpetuate this industry that displaced forcibly an entire population overseas, and without even the notion of what would happen one day if they were freed, or could they make trouble one day, whether these individuals were impervious or merely oblivious, whether they could conceive of it and just didn't care, or whether they didn't even conceive of it. The point was, either way, they didn't care, as long as they could get theirs. And it's the same thing with a whore. It's not a matter of what you're going to do to these children and subsequent generations to the nation and any community, as well as your own children. As long as I get mine. It's the same narrow-minded, short-sighted outlook and view of the world that those that led and perpetuated the slave industry once had and had to have towards society in general, towards their fellow man, to be able to do the sorts of things they did. It requires that sort of selfish, narrow-minded, short-sighted outlook to not care about anyone but yourself and your own morbid, twisted, warped needs in the immediate, and not care about subsequent generations or the future or anybody but yourself. So that's additionally why I find the American whore so despicable, as well as her male counterpart, I guess, those that can't do any better. I don't let them off the hook either. They're both comparably as accountable. But that's the finale of what I wanted to assert on that front. I'd be remiss if I didn't talk a little bit about Tanya. There, I said it. No great insight here. I think I need to have something positive to take with me, some positive memories, and there are a lot. And she was the centerpiece of a fair number of them. I'd said, if it wasn't for Anne, Oklahoma almost wouldn't have been worth it, and without Tanya, Germany almost wouldn't have been worth it. And if it's one female that I refuse to harbor any ill will going forward. It's her. I won't, though. She was the best I was able to do, apparently. And not for a moment, I don't think, when we began seeing each other, did I say, well, now I can stop looking. The point came where I was ready to move on, but there was just no one to move on to, really. That's okay, though, because what developed over time was as disjointed as it was. I was able to check a lot of boxes, and there were a lot of great experiences there. Even, I keep hearing the lyric to this song, flew me to places I've never been, and I did that. I flew her to Milan, Oslo, and Dublin. So it's nice to be able to know that certain lyrics, and others as well, and sentiments that once were alien and foreign to me, now I can empathize with and have more relevance. Even after a couple of years ago at our final farewell in Frankfurt, again, completely incidental alliteration. The following, and this is typical female logic that's not quantitative at all. I just stopped having feelings for you. That falls along the falls along the lines of such gibberish as there's just no chemistry, or there's no spark, or I don't know. I'm not going to get negative though. The following afternoon at the Frankfurt airport, I just felt like the wind was kicked out of me. But I came home and I listened to this Kiss song that I'd never liked before, and it was a slow ballad that I had no connection with. I Still Love You. It's I guess you'd call it a breakup song, a song of yearning, but it's not a female breakup song. It's not a bitchy, like, I'm better off without you. It's a contemplative, reflective, mournful song that all of a sudden now I can appreciate. So there's a scene from it's part of living, and for that alone I'm grateful, I guess. There's a scene from Cheers where Congresswoman Eldridge just dumps Sam, and Norm says, looks like Dump City, we've all been there. That's pretty miserable. And then Cliff says, well, guess I'm lucky. I never been dumped. And Norm says, well, I think you've had to have gone with somebody in the first place to get dumped, Cliff. So I guess I'm one up on Cliff, I guess. Took her to a couple of dances over there, which was more important. But realizing how important a dress is and how important just getting dressed up. And I would have taken her to a third if had they not canceled the Sweethearts Ball in February. I was able to check quite a few boxes, and again, as disjointed as it was. Bought candies chocolates for her one Valentine's Day, roses another Valentine's Day, and out of that I have what I have remaining: a voicemail, a postcard, and a photo album of our week here. Granted, I think she wanted to see Florida more than me, but I wasn't gonna bitch about that. But I remember being on Miami Beach, thinking if the me of 5 years ago could see me now frolicking in the surf with this Fräulein of Miami Beach, I think I'd be pretty impressed. But knowing the context of it, I know she's going back to Germany. I never could convince her to commit to moving here and staying here and committing to a life with me, and that's just as well now, for a number of reasons. She was no Diane Chambers, but I guess that is what it is. Took her up in a hot air balloon. That was an experience. You know, I checked as many boxes as I can when I'm with someone, because I have a feeling it's never going to be long. And Grant, sure enough, I mean, not ever during one segment. I figured I'd never actually get married, so I actually made it a point to carry her across the threshold. That was no easy chore. She was no dainty article. Not fat, but that was a workout all the same. It was doable, did it. But there was a nice tub in my apartment in Eder Oberstein. Tried to do the bubble bath thing. I mean, officially, yes, checked that box. Didn't really work out all that well. But she was the best I was able to do, and I don't and that warrants appreciation upon reflection in hindsight. So I have to acknowledge that, and I guess I am thankful for that, and for a few other things that I'm able to take forward with me. I thought that warranted commentary. That and her. Well. There are a couple really incidents and issues in the news currently I feel compelled to comment on. That's completely unintentional, that alliteration. It's just on occasion pops out, by the way. That's not intentional. The invasion of Central American children and Hobby Lobby. I'll make this quick. How the Unaffordable Care Act, for whatever reason, pays for birth control, and then one company said, no, we'd rather not do that, but just for a smidgen of the birth control. How it is that this healthcare law ultimately facilitates the sex lives of slutty girls, the casual sex lives of slutty girls, is beyond me, how that got put into the law. But really, I'm not even going to comment on Hobby Lobby as much as that aspect of the law. When I discovered that, I was astonished. But really, if the law is going to be, I mean, it's not a healthcare issue. It's not like prenatal vitamins. You don't have to be slutty. You know, again, I'm fully encouraging sluttiness, but I shouldn't have to pay for it. But if I as a taxpayer are expected to pay for it, shouldn't the same healthcare law also facilitate my sex life? Let's say, for instance, I jerk off, I need porn. To do that, shouldn't this healthcare law subsidize or even completely recoup any subscriptions I make to porn sites? If it's going to a bit extreme, I'm obviously being facetious, but really, if you're going to facilitate the sex lives of females, you should facilitate everyone's sex life, including, you know, I could make that, and I am making that point. I would have to imagine also, though, if I was a 19, 20-year-old female who actually had committed myself to chastity and purity and saving myself for marriage, those females, I would be offended. Those females also are, through their taxpayer dollars, facilitating their slutty sisters that haven't made that choice. And I'm not condemning your lifestyle whatsoever, but I shouldn't have to pay for it. But those females also are facilitating the casual sex lives of anybody, of whatever dopey college co-ed that wants to. Do your thing. Just I don't. How you can justify expecting everyone to pay for that, but I'll leave that at that. I'll finish up with to what a nation could do if we just had the collective will. If this really is the greatest threat to our sovereignty, which it is, this far eclipses any potential invasion by the Japanese or a militarized invasion with tanks and bombers. This is much more subtle yet much more effective. It's invasion of our blood and our collective treasure and taxpayer base. But ultimately, it's about blood. And I'm not afraid to admit that. Until you free yourself from addressing race as important, you're going to be a slave to the system. I refuse to be a slave to the system any longer. But then again, what do I have at this point to lose? The French and the Germans after World War I were so concerned with each other that they built militarized lines, the Maginot Line and the Seestricht Line. They were each other's greatest threat to their sovereignty. We could have a half-mile, if we really had the collective will, we could build a half-mile militarized zone. In Vietnam there was a demilitarized zone. This could be a militarized zone from ocean to ocean, 10 to 20 million landmines backed up by machine gun, motion-censored, motion-detected machine guns in pillboxes. Now, does that sound extreme? Yes, but it's an extreme circumstance, isn't it? How long are you going to be pushed? And I was listening to somebody actually recommended. I couldn't believe somebody had the same notion. But then again, nobody is so unique as to have, in general, an idea or a concept that is unique just to them. I was listening to this chap on this talk show that mentioned landmines, and he was talking to a sheriff in the show. Oh, what if somebody wants to go? He obviously shot him down because he couldn't broaden his mind. And you had this narrow-minded focus of what you can do and what you can't do. But he was, well, what if some folks just want to go sightseeing? I guess that would be an issue. Well, you would advertise it. You would advertise it not only to the nation, but also to our southern neighbors. This is now a militarized zone. Signs, English and Spanish, postings. It would be a shock to no one. This is not a sightseeing area. This is now a militarized zone. But the nation doesn't. I mean, if a sheriff can't get behind that, who is no collective? But that's not even that. If we just had in any number of East Texas ports, like Galveston, for instance, this wouldn't take much. 10 massive barges. And as soon as a detention center fills up, or as soon as you have a collective 1,000 illegals, transport them by bus, cram them into the barge. Don't even fly them back. Passenger airline fuel is expensive. A barge alone would pack them in as like sardines, send them back to whatever shore, Mexico, Central America, dump them, and then you'd have the next barge pop up and be ready. I don't see what the issue is. I think that's humane enough. But just a couple of insights on what really shouldn't be issues at all. But that's what happens when you have a weak nation with no backbone. I want to talk for a few minutes about grown men and the sports jerseys they wear, and how even as a teen I never wore a sports jersey of a professional athlete, even as a teen. But as a teen, I suppose you can get away with it. You can excuse a lot of an adolescent. But when I was living and teaching in Maryland, there was a bar I went to frequently, and there was always this group of middle-aged men who, on game day, and I'd go there on Sundays to watch whatever teams I was into at the time, that's rather irrelevant, but these group of middle-aged men would have Ravens jerseys on, and I thought a couple of things. One, that's pretty homoerotic, because when you really think about it, you've got another man's jersey on your back, which really, you've got a man on your back. That's pretty gay. Well, I'll say homoerotic. You've got another man's name across your back. But secondly, and even more substantially, I would say, is the message it sends to anyone who thinks about it even an iota, which I guess I have, in that I have no sense of self-worth myself. I'm going to hopefully adopt some of this person's self-worth by wearing their jersey, and hopefully, or a replica of their jersey, and hopefully it will diffuse into me, and I can co-opt some of their, I guess, what we perceive as greatness. Those are the two messages that for me, and really, what do? You can jump high, you can run fast, you're on a par with a cheetah or a gazelle, or you can hit a little ball far. And I'm gonna buy your. I mean, I'm still an NFL fan, but from the perspective of the coordinators, to me, the coordinators are really they're like chess players, masterful chess players. The players themselves are really just pawns. I mean, they're talented pawns. The game doesn't work without them, but for me, the real stars are the coordinators. If I was going to wear someone's jersey, it would be a Norv Turner jersey, it would be a Ken Wisenhunt jersey, it would be a Dick LeBeau jersey. But I'm not wearing anyone's jersey because I'm not a homosexual, and I have enough self-worth and identity of my own that I feel no compulsion to do that. But commentary on that aspect of our culture. Do with that what you will. Okay. Hopefully this will be clear enough as well. I'd like to talk now a little bit about the 5 marks, the 5 indications of the American nig. To me, it's only worth one syllable. And I'm not going to use, I feel no need to use code, I'm not going to say thug, nig. Now, I prescribe to the notion that Chris Rock presented, that there are black people and there are nigs, and there is a disparity, there's a difference. And he said, I love black people, but I hate nigs. Well, I don't love them. I mean, that's like, everybody's born some way, somewhere. You can't condemn someone or despise someone for how they're born. You have no control over that. But like Chris Rock, I despise nigs, but for different reasons. His was based on, I guess, criminality. What I can despise is actions and behavior, and that you have control over. And if you want to know why it is that so much of Middle America despise you, I'll lay it out. Very easy things to correct. One, I see dreadlocks as the black man's mullet. For those of you who don't know what mullets are or were. You don't really see them anymore because they looked ridiculous. A lot of young Americans had them in mid 80s, late 80s, and at some point, I think pretty much at the same moment, Americans just looked at each other and said, "You know, you look ridiculous. I look ridiculous. Let's go to the barber. Let's get a haircut." I'd like to think that one day the day will come where your typical nig will look at each other and say, I don't know what the meaning, the notion behind it is, or the motivation, but at some point they'll say, "You know, you look ridiculous." At what point did Milli Vanilli become back into vogue? I don't know. Didn't they used to be a laughingstock? And now this is somehow in vogue and chic. It's among the gutter of our society, I guess, anyway. But you look like a Jamaican crack dealer. Is that the point? To try to look obnoxious? It's in particular tough for me to still remain an NFL fan. I've been an NFL fan since I was 17, but it just doesn't make sense in that there's a societal pressure of like man versus self, man versus society, man versus man. There's no societal pressure on you as a male to have long hair. Not even if you're in a band anymore. Once upon a time, females have that pressure, but a lot of females tie their hair back. You know, it's annoying having long hair. Why you would go out of your way why would you want to have long hair in any capacity as a male? I don't understand. I don't get. You look like that animal from the alien from Predator. It's like these. I don't know if. And on the flip side, the strange thing is a lot of black females shave their heads. So you have females of your culture that have the short hair and males that have the long hair. It's peculiar, but it's also revolting. But I guess from the female perspective, I guess I can understand it if it's form follows function, and that's the architectural outlook from certain colleges. We don't even want to. We don't care how our college looks, how our campus looks, as long as it functions and classrooms work and so on. It's kind of like, I guess, George Costanza, that one episode of Seinfeld where he came in sweatpants and Jerry said, do you realize the presentation that you're giving to the rest of the world is, I'm not even going to try to look presentable. I know I look horrible. I might as well be comfortable. I guess if you're an ugly, disgusting black female, I might as well be comfortable. I might as well shave my head. I guess I get that. It kind of makes sense, but is it any wonder then why you see so much mongrelization? And I see plenty of black dudes with white females. I don't see too many white dudes with black females, but lose some weight. That's another thing that I don't understand. And this isn't under the same category of nig. It's just why it is that I'm going to say a third to a fifth of black females are disgustingly obese. Is that genetic or is it dietary? Is it? I don't know. I'm curious about that. But I would have to imagine that's driving your men away. I would imagine. But I'll get to mongrelization at another time. Number two, the pants below the butt. Do you realize that's a gay thing that originated? I know you think it's like a prison thing, and it did originate in prison. But what you're saying to the world is, this is open for business. I'm open for sodomy. So when I see pants below the butt, I think fag. I think that's he's out for some sodomy. Just realize you're giving off that, and you're part of the dregs of society as well. Three wife beaters out in public. That's underwear out in public. And I realize there's trailer trash. Look, every race has their gutter. The Vietnam is the gutter of the Orient. Trailer trash, I guess, is the gutter of white people, and nigs are the gutter of black culture. I would imagine if I was like a 40, 50-year-old black man going to work, working hard, I'd be embarrassed by the thuggery of your culture. I know I'm embarrassed by what is it? The cable guy, Larry the Cable Guy. I mean, he embarrasses me. So anyone who wears white beaters out in public, put a shirt on. That's underwear. But if you're used to showing your underwear and wearing your pants below your butt anyway, why not? But You look ridiculous. About 4. I guess 5 would be rims. I never saw rims until I came to. That's just sort of bizarre and ostentatious. But I know as soon as I see rims, that's got to be a nig. That's no Asian or white man or even like a respectable 50-year-old black. That's a nig. So if you're curious why you're getting like strange looks or dirty looks, if it's not deliberate and you're not aware, be aware now. You don't have to be a degenerate. You don't have to be disgusting. You can. It doesn't take that much effort or energy or money to look presentable. And and as far as speaking, maybe that's number 6. It just takes a little bit of energy to sound like you care. They have some sense of, I care how I sound, some sense of urgency, maybe one way of putting it. But when you just sort of like leave off every syllable of every word and sound like you don't care, yeah, that's linguistically, I guess, the mark of a nig as well. But that goes to the root of the nig of being lazy. It's if you actually have energy and you care, it'll come out in how you sound as well. And that's the first thing people notice about you, is how you put your words together. You don't have to be an expert, though. You just have to put some energy into it. That should be good for that take. I just wanted to conclude very briefly on the source and where this societal pressure comes from. Largely, it comes from television shows and girls. If you want to know or are curious why, in part, guys are so anxious and aggressive and in a hurry, just watch any number of television shows that have like 13, 14-year-olds. I mean, forget about high school students as their characters, going on dates and doing any variety of things. And this. I remember when I got to Germany and I was in my little room at the Lagerhof, and I was watching one of the only shows that would come in on the AFN was Seventh Heaven. It's supposed to be a Christian show. I mean, it is, I guess, but there was this character who was 12 years old, and he had a girlfriend. Now, what sort of message does that send to any kid watching who's 11, 12? And none of these messages are for, like, if you're on top of things already, if you're a stud already, disregard. This isn't for you. It's like, but what sort of expectation does that place when you're 12, 13? You don't know the difference between reality and Fantasyland, which is what this is, which is, hey, this it's easy enough to build a storyline around. But what sort of expectation is that and message is that going to send to an 11, 12-year-old that, well, I guess that's what I should be doing at 12? Yeah, I blame Seventh Heaven as much as I blame any number of shows. Full House. That was a big one on me. This the girl was 13. I can't imagine I'm the only one that was watching like shows like this thinking, what am I doing wrong if all these characters are her uncles were trying to set up her spin the bottle party, or trying to get her first kiss. You're overdue. You're 13. And this is no adult themed show. This is Full House. I'm not even commenting on your more scandalous caliber television shows. I'm talking like shows that fly under the radar but are still sending those messages and those messages have consequences. So that's, I think, by and large, what I wanted to conclude with that I'd left out before. I'd like to talk today a little bit about diversity and how the concept of it has been so misconstrued and warped and misperceived and mispresented over the years, and how it emerged, or well, I guess it doesn't really matter how it emerged or why it emerged, but that it has emerged as some sort of, I mean, there are positive aspects to it, but by and large, it's a catastrophic phenomenon when it is allowed to proliferate. I think I was a freshman as an undergrad, and the zeitgeist had taken hold of it and embraced it for whatever reason. This one girl in class said, "Now we're going to talk about why diversity is such a good thing." And I said, or the different reasons why it's a good thing. And I said, "Oh, I can tell you why it's a bad thing," but I didn't elaborate. I think now might be a good time, albeit briefly. What is important to a nation? What constitutes a nation? It's more than a constitution. It's more than a set of laws. Someone could, in a position of power, could rip up the Constitution tomorrow and declare the U.S., I mean, we practically have a dictator right now, but officially, the U.S. is now a dictator, or a monarchy. America would still be America, just like France was still France before and after 1789, before and after the Revolution. They went from a monarchy to what Napoleon created, and Russia was still Russia before and after the Soviet Union, within the confines and the context of the Soviet Union. You know, you had all these hundreds of years of czars, and then 1918, 1917, and then the revolution, and then 1989, but Russians were still Russians. It's a nation's blood and their history and their culture and their blood, their ethnicity is what makes them. And that's not popular, apparently, to say today, but I've never been popular anyway, so I'm going to say it. Without blood, a nation has nothing. And it can be destroyed. A long time ago, before France was France, it was Gaul. And Caesar invaded and essentially wiped out the Gauls. He killed a good 2 million of them or so. Those he didn't kill, he enslaved, wiped out the Gaul blood pretty much, and that which he didn't wipe out, he brought back to Rome. France came from the Franks, a Germanic tribe which crossed the Rhine, settled, and became the French. You can have ethnic displacement. It has happened. Doesn't happen often, but it can happen if a society and the people are lulled to sleep, or fall asleep at the wheel, or lose their principles and their backbone. If a nation doesn't have a sovereign, an ethnic sovereign, it has no nation. And if you want an example, look at any number of African nations today. Nigeria, Angola, that are torn apart by ethnic strife. Tribes battling each other for generations because there's no one ethnicity to step forward and say, we are Nigerians, or we are what. If I hear people speak about this as if it's inevitable, but if it is, then the disintegration and implosion of this nation is also inevitable. How some people can simply sit back and throw up their hands, or it requires a collective consciousness and will, and I don't think that will exists but it won't be you that suffers the consequences, or even your children, but it'll be your grandchildren that wake up one day and look around, and they'll look at the nation, and they'll look at the history books, and they'll look at old movies, and they'll say, wait, what happened between here and there? What happened? And who's to blame? Well, this generation largely is to blame. The people that think they're doing the right thing but couldn't be more wrong. Borders expand, borders contrast, but a people are still a people as long as they have their ethnic character. Do with that what you will. But when it becomes too late, it will be too late, and there will be no, well, what can we do about this now? Nothing. There was a time when you could have done something about it, and that time is now. But no one will. There's not even enough of a collective will to deport the illegals that we have, or guard our borders. So it'll be your grandchildren that wake up foreigners in their own country. But that'll be it won't be your issue. It'll be your grandchildren's issue. But again, selfishness and short-sightedness, not caring, just like the American whore, just like the slave owner and the merchant, not caring about subsequent generations and what the decisions, the warped decisions that you make and the outlook on life and society that you have catastrophically affect generations on down the road. As long as I get mine, I guess is the common refrain. But you won't suffer, but it'll be your grandchildren and that one day curse you and spit on your bones and piss on your grave. The liberal degenerates that think they're doing the right thing, but they'll piss on your grave. Wish I could be around to see that. Let's give this a try here. Hopefully it doesn't go all blurry. I'd like to talk about pursuing an objective that doesn't want to be obtained in spite of perseverance, persistence. If I can equate it, metaphorically speaking, to there's an objective on the other side of some barrier, and you keep crashing into a barrier, and you don't know what that barrier is, whatever it is. At some point you discover it's a brick wall. And how many times at that point can you continue to pick yourself up, launch yourself full force into this brick wall that you're not going to break down? You fall down, you're bruised, you're battered, but you get up and you try to learn from it. What's there to learn? But you're still intent on getting to that objective on the other side when there's a brick wall in your way. For years I pursued the path of defiance. I based everything around that. That I could have, with that mechanism, I could have legitimately, legally been productive and perhaps destructive as well, but in a productive way. For 5 years, how many bedrooms, how many basements, how many studios, restaurants, bars, how many guitar players did I meet with? I based everything around that. But at some point you realize you're throwing yourself into a brick wall, and it's not. At some point you have to stop and say, that objective doesn't want to be obtained. Let's try another objective. Let's see if there's an objective over there, and if there's not a brick wall in its way. there have been other objectives, and other objectives I've obtained. But as far as females, for instance, yes and no. By and large, no. Some yes. But ultimately, that like ultimate, just since I've been down here alone, it seems to have felt like another brick wall. Whether it's, there was an econ doctoral student across from my office. And I said it to him at one point, I'd been on 14 different first dates with 14 different girls in the past like 2 months. And he seemed impressed, but I said, don't be impressed. That's not a good thing. I'm not bragging. That's a bad thing. If just one of them was decent, would step up and had some semblance of backbone, how can you determine what you need to know? How arrogant do you need to be after one first date? But that's indifference as well. There was one, talking more about indifference, there was one broad that said, I was out with her. She actually wrote to me. We were out and I said, do you plan on getting serious and having getting married one day? You know, forget about any time soon, one day. Oh, sure, definitely, I'm definitely pro-family, but I'm not in any big hurry. I'm only 27. I thought, how long, the question I ended up with was, how long are you going to continue, and how many females have this, how long are you going to continue to say to yourself and out loud to others, yes, but I'm only X, I'm only 29, I'm only 31, I'm only what? At what point do you, it's not death, it's growing up. I hear so much about how males are afraid to commit. I'm not. It's females in my experience, and you can say, oh, it's just nobody's. You can say it's just me, but nobody's that unique. My brother once said, nobody is so unique that their outlook, that their perspective, is theirs and theirs alone. No one's that unique. I'm not. I can't be that unique. Encountering females that just don't want to grow up, and I gave a lecture on this once when I was to my juniors. What's the definition of adulthood? I didn't have any syllabus to go by. There was no syllabus. So I constructed my own definition and lecture based on when you put your own needs secondary, when you put the needs of somebody else, when you get to the point in your life where you put somebody else's needs ahead of your own, then you become an adult. And some people never become an adult. I know there are confirmed bachelors, but there are females as well. I think there's more and more like Sex in the City females who are like late 30s and they've blown off man after man because they think they're. There was an episode of Oprah I caught at least a little bit of. Must have been flipping through channels, and the topic was, why are there so many complete package females still single? And I thought, I'd love to have been in the audience. The answer was in the question. Arrogance is not part of the total package. But if you think you're too good for everyone, you're going to be like late 30s or early 40s and just hating men. Well, if you put yourself up on this pedestal, and I'm not going to lower myself at all, yeah, you're going to you're going to be bitter. You're going to be alone. I told this to, what did I call her? Big Red. I knew she was big, but, fatties need love too. And my fuckability threshold is pretty far out there. She was probably a little bit past it, but we had a good time. And she even admitted that she was a third wheel, that she hung out with her sister and her husband, and she knew she was a third wheel, but she still couldn't get serious with her life. And she had the nerve to write to me and say something along the lines of, I was trying to let you down easy. You're the fatty. If anyone's going to let anyone... And I felt compelled to get nasty, but not that I wanted to. I'd have preferred to be positive. But how long can you continue to crash into a wall that has an objective on the other side before you realize it's a brick wall? Your body cannot physically crash through a solid brick wall. I could refer that as well to these 2 pointless master's degrees I have, but that's another story. Let's see if this is clear enough to view. I'd like to talk today a little bit about pop music and the double standard one can't help but recognize, and the contrasting messages from both male pop singers as opposed to female pop singers, and it branches into country music as well, pop country, I guess you'd say. But not that I listen to a lot of pop music myself as it is, just what I'm subjected to at the gym. But even in that, to that extent, to that small sample, I recognize, and if I recognize, I'd have to imagine that the youth of today that actually listen to this crap would be subjected to it, and subject to the messages even more so, especially those, the majority, that aren't strong enough and aware enough to really process it properly. Now, what am I talking about exactly? When you hear male pop singers and pop songs, the theme, the message is singular. It's pretty much one theme. Let me lick your asshole. Let me kiss your ass. You're amazing just the way you are. You're beautiful. You're blah. Let me fawn all over you. The one that really gets me is, why do you gotta be so rude? I'm gonna marry you anyway. Be a total bitch. I'll still marry you. No accountability. If you want to understand why females are as arrogant as they are in society today, young females, not that this is the only reason, but it's certainly, I'd have to say, one of the main reasons. Just listen to the messages they're being bombarded with. Don't act responsibly. Don't be accountable. I'm gonna lick your ass no matter what. Now, so you have to look at yourselves, males, and male society largely, and male pop singers, of what contributory negligence, is that the term? You're contributing to this, at least in part, partially. If you hold a certain people to a certain standard, collectively, especially females, they'll frequently adhere to and either raise themselves or lower themselves to that standard. But if your standard is do whatever you want, I'm still gonna kiss your ass, how do you expect them to really respond? Not that that's an excuse. On the flip side, the frequent theme, if not the primary theme, among female pop singers is bitchy. It's I'm better off without you, I hate you, since you've been gone, I can breathe for the first time. I expressed this to a female once, and she's, they're just breakup songs. Well, is every female always in a constant state of breaking up and male hating and hating men? Is that all you want to hear? Is that what does it for you? That's a pretty sorry state of affairs if it is the case. And why is there's a term for female hating? It's misogynism. There's no alternate. There's no term for man hating in the dictionary for if a female hates men. You call it male hating. That's an absence in our lexicon. There's, what was the one that I was just listening to? I got one less problem without you. Or, you're just one more problem. I don't need. It's so, I call them cunty female songs. But there's one the queen of this to me is Carrie Underwood, in particular because it's so ironic and hypocritical, and no one for some reason will call her on it. And when she first came out, I dug the first song was Jesus Take the Wheel, and I really it was unique and it was different, and not that I'm a Jesus freak, but it was refreshing. It was something I appreciated it for what it was. It was trying to be something nice. The very next song, her theme was, I'm going to vandalize your car and your property because you hurt my feelings, and I'm going to justify it. And it was so smarmy and smug and like bragging about the vandalism she'd committed on her ex's car, I guess. But that's not even the one song of hers that I'm referring to in particular. She advocates murder in one of her songs and brags about it. If you listen to, and nobody calls her on it, you listen to Two Cadillacs. It's some dude is married and he's got a mistress, and they conspire, and he buys them both a Cadillac apparently. They conspire to murder him, accomplish it, and then they both meet each other in their Cadillacs at the funeral. And it's also smug, and like the message is, if you hurt my feelings, I can justify anything. And that's the message that females, I think, are getting from female pop music. As long as your feelings are hurt, anything is justified. Vandalize a car, commit murder. So the pop world has to take, you can, I guess, release whatever you want, but there are consequences and behavior. If you want to instill some level of humility in females of today, look at the music that you're, and songs and lyrics that you're presenting. Arrogance, indifference, and treachery. I have a female friend, actually, that is the wife of a friend of mine, and she's, by and large, a cool broad. But we were drinking one night, me and her husband, and I was mentioning these things of how treacherous females are or can be or are capable of being, and she, rather than deny it and beyond just acknowledging it, she said, "Oh, I'm treacherous myself. I'm treacherous towards everyone except my husband." She didn't even try to deny it. So don't be astonished by these terrible things that are happening to you if you're going to acknowledge that you are and you embody all of these horrible traits, and you're not even going to try to do anything about them. People can change. I think of that theme from the end of Rocky IV. Everybody can change, at least in theory. But if you're content with being the horrible leper of an individual that you are, bad things are justified. But you can change. You don't have to be. You can rebuff the horrible messages you're getting from pop music and actually be a decent human being. I'm sure there are a few of you out there, but if you already know that you're arrogant and you know that you're treacherous, why you would continue like that? And it's not just females. I met an officer candidate when I was in OCS. He admitted, I'm an asshole. That's who I am. I mean, he knew it and acknowledged it. That was who he was. So why would you be comfortable and complacent knowing that you're an asshole? Why? And he got kicked out. He couldn't do land nav. He was fucking with me. Like, nobody's, like, again, why I attract blue falcons. I attract assholes. This is kind of an aside. I don't even remember his name, him and his shaved head. He was fucking with me, but he couldn't even do, when I was brand new to land nav, and I was the first time, but why would you acknowledge, like, you know this is what you are and you're comfortable with it? That's astonishing to me. Well, that's it for now. Carnifex again. Here. I'd like to talk a little bit about the NFL and the Rooney Rule. I've been an NFL fan since 95. I couldn't watch it when I was playing it. When I stopped playing it, then I could start watching it. It's the only real sport at any level that I care to watch it. I'm interested in to any degree, but almost as soon as I began watching it, I began to see the warped liberal racial politics begin to apply themselves, primarily in the form of the Rooney Rule. And well, on the one hand, it's tough to watch a team or a league that's so predominantly black, but on the other hand, if you look at it from a meritocracy perspective, you have to respect it for what it is. If the best athlete gets drafted, if that's what it is, okay. But there was almost immediately after I began watching the league, this outcry, there's not enough black coaches being hired. There was no outcry at all about there's not enough white athletes. I mean, the problem, this was 1998 or so when I think the Rooney Rule was roughly implemented. The problem is not a lack of black coaches. The problem is a lack of white athletes. I mean, when I heard almost from the outset, well, there's so few coaches as compared to the athletes. Well, there's so few athletes compared to the populace. If you're going to go by ratios, well, we should have more of a ratio of black coaches to black athletes. Well, if you're going to purely go by ratios, there should be more white athletes as opposed to a white populace. But fans have no souls and are spineless. They'll follow anyone. At least need to have a white quarterback. If a team doesn't have, regardless of, if a team doesn't have a white quarterback, I can't even watch. I at least need that. Give me that at least. I have to have some principles. I'm not your typical fan. But if you're going to have a social agenda, which the NFL apparently does and did at that time, and say, well, we're going to implement a policy that attempts to artificially that overrides meritocracy, that artificially tries to implement a certain class of people into the coaching ranks, there also should be a Rooney Rule for white athletes, and in particular, white defensive players. The same outcry, it seems, from the sports media and the media in general. And every couple of years you see this. It was a couple of years ago in particular, you get your usual degenerate liberal homos like, is it Jay Moore? Jay Moore, who doesn't know what he's talking about and can't apply critical analysis. He just goes with the flow, jumps on the bandwagon. And there was a couple of years ago, I think it was just last year's off season, there was like 8 new head coaching hires and 8 GMs. They were all white, and him and any number of other degenerates were all pissing and moaning, but there's no comparable outcry when a team drafts like 8 black athletes. No, that's because that fits the agenda. But if you can't have it both ways is the point. If you're going to look at pure meritocracy, you have to just dump the Rooney Rule and say, best individual gets hired. There's no agenda at all with these teams. These sports writers don't realize. It gets annoying to have to read these articles every offseason. But owners and GMs are just as soulless as fans. All they care about is winning. They don't care. They'll draft an RG3 with dreads and buck teeth. Hey, if it can help us win, there's no bias as far as who they hire regarding coaches and GMs. They'd hire a paraplegic lesbian Eskimo as a head coach if they thought it would get it to a Super Bowl. There really is. That really is a bottom line business. But you can't have it both ways. If the Rooney Rule is going to continue, there really should be a Rooney Rule for white defensive athletes. And really, as beyond the cornerback position, maybe the running back positions, a position, blacks are not necessary for the NFL. if you really look at position by position, and this is supply and demand. If fans really, I was watching a little bit of the Hank Aaron story on HBO, and there was backlash, as you would expect, late 40s, crossing the color barrier, and these fans went to the game, I guess in Brooklyn, and were booing him, or whatever stadium that it was at. Well, if you're trying to safeguard your league, don't go to the game. I mean, owners don't care if you pay and boo as long as you pay. Don't go to the game. That could have been ended right there. But look at each position. I mean, if this falls on GMs at the NFL level, it falls on head coaches at the college level. If you really want to bring some level of parity, some actual diversity, and have just a 50-50 roster, I mean, how long can you perpetuate your own self-destruction at the expense of how important is winning at all costs? If fans demanded it, you would not have much of a drop-off at all. At wide receiver a little bit, running back a little bit. But, I mean, look at every position. Every linebacker could be Brian Cushing, Kiko Alonso, Sean Lee, Brian Urlacher, best linebacker, Luke Kuechly, defensive player of the year a couple of years ago. Defensive ends, or defensive linemen. Every defensive lineman could be Jared Allen, Brian Robeson, Jason Babin, J.J. Watt, instead of them being the exception, not even being the rule, but being every other athlete. If there was more integrity and responsibility involved in scouting, you wouldn't have to have such a lopsided, biased roster. Safeties, every safety could be Chris Conte, Harrison Smith, Eric Weddle, best safety in the league, Eric Weddle. Instead of being 5% of the safeties, they could be 30 to 40 to 50%. You would not have much of a drop-off at all. Offensive linemen, I mean, it doesn't even warrant commentary. Running backs, I wish I could be around to see what Toby Gerhardt's going to do this autumn. Peyton Hillis had a decent season a couple seasons ago. You might have a bit of a drop-off there. But wide receiver, there could be a lot more Jordy Nelsons. There could be a lot more Brian Hartlines and Wes Welkers and I mean, look at what Julian Edelman was able to accomplish when he was just given an opportunity. I mean, you decide for yourself what jersey are you going to wear? What jersey can you stomach wearing? Who are you going to look up, and who are you going to allow and oversee your kids to look up to? Some thug with dreads that, I mean, if you are what you are, but as of late, I was watching the draft just last year, it was like every other black athlete was dreads halfway down their back. Are you going to wear that jersey of that animal, that thing, and let your kid? But it's all a matter of what level of backbone and integrity are you going to have as a fan? Who are you going to follow? The power of the purse dictates everything, which is why I despise this society so. The lack of integrity, the lack of principles, the lack of attempting to just hold an organization or a team to a higher standard. You know, as long as we're winning, it's disappointing, but welcome to America. I just wanted to finish up on the meritocracy perspective of the NFL. And on the one hand, that's completely legitimate if you're going to look at it from that perspective. But there is another perspective, and the perspective is casting. If you look at it like casting for a TV show or a movie as regarding what you want to watch, what you're comfortable watching. There's a reason why Stella got her groove back bombed, and why Titanic was a hit. You choose what you want to watch. If you look at the NFL from a casting perspective, it's all about what you're comfortable watching and what you can. It's not a matter of the system saying this is what you're going to watch and you don't have any say in it. If you're going to accept that and be a slave of the system, then if you don't demand anything better, you're not going to get anything better. And I can't imagine that I'm the only one that you're watching a team and all of a sudden you're like, I'm watching a black quarterback, black receivers, black. Who am I watching? Who am I watching from my perspective? And why? And can anything be done about it? Well, if you actually shake off your brainwashing and reject the indoctrination that says this has to be this way, you have the power in your hands if you actually can regrow the backbone that your ancestors had and say, no, I'm not going to be told the way it is. That's just the final point I wanted to make on that subject. And there is another counterbalance and a counterweight to meritocracy, which is completely valid. But there's also an equally valid perspective of the customer is always right. And what the customer demands, there's supply and demand. So there is another perspective. There isn't just one way to view the world. There isn't just one way to view, and in this particular instance, I'm taking the NFL. But if you have the courage to demand something else, ultimately, there will be a response from the system. McDonald's once said, hey, styrofoam containers for Big Macs. This is the way it's going to be. And enough people got together and said, wait a minute. This is harmful to the environment. It's not imperative that styrofoam containers be the norm. It won't affect the taste of our Big Macs, and it'll be a lot better for the environment. And lo and behold, there's no more styrofoam containers. If you don't actually reject your cowardice, and if you can actually demand something better, something different, you'll just be continued to be thrown the same thing that, maybe you can stomach it, maybe you can accept it, but is there anything better? Is there something better in this realm that can be? Well, you won't know unless you demand. But that's all. I'd like to talk a little bit about cops now and how much I hate them and why I hate them. I'm not an anarchist. I recognize the necessity of police, if they would stick to doing what they're supposed to be doing, which is responding to actual crimes, vandalism and theft and whatnot. But it seems to me, and this is only based on my own personal experience, perhaps of how somebody else I'd think differently. But in my experience, they're always there when you don't want them. And the one time I ever actually wanted a cop around, they were there. They just didn't care to intervene. I'll relate that story. Undergrad days. When must this have been? June, maybe summer. I'm going to say summer of 2000. Downtown Strip, Binghamton. I'd gotten myself kicked out of a bar. And I got somebody else kicked out, and then I got myself kicked out. And he was waiting there for me. He was a big, strapping buck, and he blindsided me. Just blindsided me. And that's one thing I can say, talking about what I have done and talking about Fight Club, thinking about Fight Club and this. You know, how much do you know about yourself? You've never been in a fight. I don't want to dial out any scars. Well, I have scars of physical and psychological, both, but certainly physical. Look at my nose, you can see that. That's for another time. So this brute just blindsided me. And until that's actually happened, this is a bit of an aside, you don't know how you're going to respond. You don't know if you can man up or you're a coward. I'd been hit in the ring before, but that's a controlled environment. This was completely uncontrolled. And just like plenty of times when I'd been hit in the ring, I blacked out on my feet. I've never been down, but I blacked out. Everything black for, must have been a couple seconds, because when I looked at my rib cage, he must have gotten a couple shots in while I was blacked out, because I looked at my rib cage the next day and there was a couple black and blue marks. I came to, though, and I went after him, and he's like, okay, now it's my turn. And he had a buddy, though, from behind that picked me up and threw me down. Thankfully, at that point, all my friends came out, when I still had friends, and they broke it up. But this is the downtown stretch, the strip of the city. And there are cops everywhere. There were cops right there that just were watching. Just didn't feel like doing anything. The one time I needed them, if it hadn't been for I relied on my friends to police the situation. I was not able to rely on what my tax dollars were paying for. However, cops are always there to rob you on the side of the road for no seatbelt or speeding tickets. They'll sit there, conniving snakes as I see them. They're vermin. They sit in this capacity. This is how I see them. When they sit at the bottom of a hill, knowing you're going to pick up momentum, you're going to be speeding a little bit. That's happened on a couple of occasions. I got out of one of them, but the fact that you have to set traps and snakes sit and wait like pythons. I see cops as worse than the mafia, and this is the analogy that I'll draw. When you pay the mafia protection money, like a business, they leave you alone. The joke is, the sick joke is that you need protection from them. But if you pay them, they actually do leave you alone. I pay my tax dollars, I pay my protection money, and I still get harassed. I still get robbed. Just stay in your, I'm paying your salary. You're getting my protection money. Just stay in your building, whatever building you hang out in. Play cards. Just leave me alone. I'm paying my protection money. And judges are like the godfathers. You come before them, and then they decide your fate. But that's the analogy that I would draw. And the one time that I needed them, they were not there, but they're always there, it seems, to pull you over and rob you on the side of the road for the pettiest of things. That's where I see them, and how that enhances society, or whether it merely justifies their own positions and pads their pockets, I don't know. But I wish I had one positive experience where they did something good and I'd seen them do something good, but I don't have that experience. But it's what you as a society allow. They're instruments, you can say, well, I'm just doing my job. But that's what the Nazis said at Nuremberg. We were just following orders. Don't have no accountability, like females, no accountability. There's always an excuse. But you're part of a tyrannical system. You're part of it. And at the end of the day, it's you that has to look in the mirror and live with yourself. But maybe if you have a family. I'm not in that position. If you have a family and you have to feed them, you'll do any sort of nefarious activity to do it and look the other way. Do it and do what you have to do. If you've subjugated your conscience to the extent where you can rob your fellow citizens, if you have to do that to feed your family, I guess, I'm not in that position. Maybe you do what you have to do. But I'd like to think one day there'll be a day of reckoning, but maybe not. But until you vote in politicians that will say no more highway robbery, literal highway robbery, no more tickets based on no seatbelt and whatever other petty nonsense, you as a society, and until you are willing to demand a reprieve from the tyranny, you're just going to receive more of it. I mean, I'm only one person. But I feel a compulsion now to discuss and address the origins of my misogynism and the rebirth and when it was reborn. Nobody emerges out of the womb one particular way, or viewing or seeing one particular group of people one particular way. It occurs over a source of accumulated experiences, or maybe it's one perpetual individual. I know a girl when I was teaching that hated her mom, and she was kind of well, that's a whole other story. But entering adolescence, I had the same goals and objectives and expectations, really, I think, as anybody, as any tweener. Is that the word? Is that the term? I would say the origins really derive in 8th grade. 8th grade home ec class. And I know there's a movie called Mean Girls, but that's girls being, I think, mean to other females. You've never, if you haven't seen the will that a group of females can generate when they target anyone, be it an adult male or a classmate or anyone. It's not just fellow classmates. It can be a grown man. I remember when I was in teacher college, we were, don't do this, don't do that. And this one, talking about treachery, one of my professors was relating the story of a teacher he knew, and he'd given piano lessons to some girl, and she'd made some baseless allegations, but you can't confirm, but you can't deny. But he fought them for years and years. This adolescent female that conceived of, all it takes is, apparently, and I talked about this before, if you offend their sensibilities, they can justify anything. And this one particular student lodged these allegations, and this grown man that should never have had to deal with this fought it for years and years. Finally, the female, once she became an adult, realized she was doing the wrong thing by perpetuating this lie and admitted it. But the target of their collective treachery can be anyone. In this particular case, it was me. It wasn't some other female. Andrea Spizak, Melissa Harpst, Kelly Weeks, I think one other, and one particular, they're the central antagonist, Jessica Truesdale. How do you respond when they, for whatever reason, collaborate to make the decision to attempt to tear somebody down, well, that's where it began. That was its origins until I figured out how to address it. And that carried into ninth grade. Jamie Farrell pulled a Chernobyl. If you're watching, you're just as, like, you played. But for the longest time, though, it came a period of time where I forgot about that. I discovered other things. I put that behind me. There have been there have been periods where I had been able to, had things gone differently. When you discover a new thing, or when I discover a new thing, I pour myself into it entirely, and I forget about everything else. And I discovered passions and interests, and that allowed me to do that. And beginning college, I was off in my own little world, but then when I was 21, I attempted to re-engage, or actually engage, college society and college life, and that included females as well. How they can justify the behavior that I'm not going to go too far into this, but because I want to be efficient with this, and this is leading somewhere. How you can give your phone number to somebody when you already have a boyfriend? How many times have you have what? Why did you give me your phone number then? I would like to think a 12-year-old would know better, but it's more instances than I can recall, and I've allowed myself to forget about a lot of them. But one I can't forget, or a couple that I can't really forget during that period. It's two females that I was working with. This was I guess an intermediate rebirth. I was working at a call center with them, and I was interacting with both of them. I must have asked for the phone number of the one, and she gave it to me. And I tried to call her on several occasions. I couldn't get through. I didn't know whether but she told me where she worked, in Boys Club. I said, okay, I'll go say hi. I left a message. Can you tell so-and-so I stopped by? Next thing, I get a phone call from the police. Oh, what's going on with these girls? Like, why are you bothering me? Why is this a concern of yours? Again, this mentality, let's just run to the authorities when our feelings are hurt. I'd committed no wrong. I was just trying to court this particular female. I said, I'm just trying to hook up with this girl. Well, they've decided not to press charge. They've decided, really, have they? Well, thank them. I didn't ask what charges they could have pressed. What, for me being aggressive? Can I press charges against them being evasive? If you're going to press charges against a male characteristic, can I press charges against a female characteristic? I can't press charges for being evasive and being dishonest. Okay. Lauren Leander was another one. Made one date, didn't show up. Made another date with her, didn't show up. Kept making excuses. Said, I could have ripped her head off. But that was an intermediate. That's what I'm getting to ultimately. And I forgot about that for the longest time. When I discovered the path, something else, something of interest, a passion that I pursued and could allow myself to selectively forget about unpleasant things, although there were always instances. Sometimes I was able to get even, sometimes not. I mean, legally get even. This is ultimately leading up to Amsterdam. And again, the treachery, the treachery that a female is capable of when her sensibilities are offended, to me is astonishing, and why nobody else has emphasized it or addressed it is the lengths that they will go to. Lying, exaggerating, outright lying. And again, and I stated this before, there were 8 of them. It wasn't like I offended. They all saw the exact same actions out of me. And the 4 dudes were like, hey, whatever, guys, a little crazy, or a little, not even crazy, but a little weird. I don't know what but not enough to take pen to paper and attempt to destroy me. The 4 that did are Lindsay Bly, Jennifer Abendroth, Heather King, and Leisha Gann. The last one was a captain. Where's the fraternization charge there? 4 cunts. I hope you're watching. I hope you're... Treachery at its most vile. When you even not unintentionally stir up a pit of vipers that they can be. And this was a pit of vipers. That is where malevolence can idle, or it can manifest itself into something. I felt such malevolence. I still feel malevolence towards them, but have I been able to subjugate it? At the very least, they deserve to be emphasized and highlighted for their treachery. I believe treachery warrants identification. Things could have conceivably gone different. That was the latest rebirth. I was already thinking, how could this play out? Where is this particular avenue going? But without that spark plug of their venom and of your lies and exaggerations. I mean, congratulations. This is first and foremost on you. There's never any... What excuse ever is there for treachery? Someone that you didn't even know that was put their faith in you, and I could use some companionship, some friends in this town here. You're all buddies with each other. I'm just some guy that is here hanging out. Well, he makes an easy victim then, doesn't he? No repercussions on our behalf. Well, potentially. But I believe in karma. I believe in what comes around goes around, and those that engage in treachery ultimately will be the victims of it. Hopefully there's been justice in some comparable regard that they've been the recipients of. People that do these sorts of things frequently end up, live by the sword, die by the sword, sort of. It's an analogy. But when you engage in certain nefarious things frequently, I think you end up being the recipient of those very sorts of actions. So that most likely, I'm going to imagine, is already the case. But if it isn't, well, I think I've covered that to the extent that I wanted to.